A new fault is forming underneath the supervolcano Campi Flegrei in Naples in Italy. Guys, when you think the news and the studies can't get any worse, then there's another study. And that one is really concerning. I mean, the last ones that I've reported about were really concerning. And guys, still, no evacuation, nothing. I mean, this is an ongoing topic. But guys, this new study, fresh out of the oven, has just been released. I read through it for you and I'm giving you a summary of the most important takeaways. And I said it in the headline, a new fault is opening up underneath Campi Flegrei. A supervolcano that has a caprock layer that keeps the lid on the volcano. Recent studies found that there is a vertical crack like a straw that connects basically the magma potentially to the surface. Only a little bit more pressure is needed, then this could go off. Last study that I reported about told you that the magma from deep below and the surface, they're reconnecting again. Also sounds very bad. And now in all this instability that is already existing in this area, with fumaroles increasing, gas emissions increasing, earthquakes increasing in magnitude and in cumulative energy, land just is rising even more per month. They announced it from 1.5 centimeters up to 2 centimeters a month. So everything is escalating, increasing, and creeping towards the point of a potential eruption. Scientists are warning. So now, a new fault. What does that mean? We will look into this, guys. Imagine 500,000 people in the red zone in Pozzuoli, like a crowded Pozzuoli is lifting up like a souffle, and then a thin cracks begins to organize in that already strained and, how can I say, brittle crust. It's lining up tiny earthquakes into a plane, so to speak. That's what this new study says is happening right now underneath Campi Flegrei Volcano in Italy. And I'll show you what the scientists found, why it matters, and I will also show you the graphics that really make it visible for us what is going on. We know Campi Flegrei, that supervolcano, has been restless for years, shaking the greater Naples area with more than 6 million people, scaring people, damaging buildings and infrastructure. The ground is rising, the gases are changing and increasing, and the earthquakes are getting more frequent and higher in magnitudes. And this study specifically looks at where, not just how many, those earthquakes are happening. Where are they happening? So they used a smart statistics method to see if these little quakes are still scattered everywhere. Campi Flegrei is a caldera that also stretches into the water, into the Gulf of Pozzuoli. It's a widespread area, about roughly 100 kilometers, 70 miles. So it's not one stratovolcano that throws everything like Vesuvius. So are the earthquakes still spreading and scattered everywhere, or are they starting to, or have already started to line up to form a real fault? And their result is interesting. Since 2023, more than half of the seismic energy and over 50% of the earthquakes are clustering on a single tilted plane under the center of the caldera. I recently reported that they used AI and that we had more than 50,000 earthquakes, and you see the red areas, and this was already giving us a picture that there might be a fault line. So lining up, these earthquakes are lining up. Think of it as the birth of a volcano-tectonic fault underneath the most densely populated area in the world, probably, that lives on a volcano. So this is an extensional crack that dips about 53 degrees and it trends roughly west-southwest to east-northeast, like strike near north 249 degrees. So this, what does that mean? In other words, this likely marks a shift from soft, elastic bending of the crust through this bradyseism to brittle failure in specific places. Think of this as a balloon that you fill with air. It reaches the point of maximum elasticity. That's what they mean with soft elastic bending. If you then blow up more air, it reaches the point of brittle failure until it blows. And that's what this caprock layer that keeps the lid on the pressure cooker is experiencing right now. And that caprock layer has lost 2/3 of its strength since the last crisis in the 80s. So very concerning. Because if we add up the results of all these studies, it gives us a picture that something can happen at any time. Even a small eruption, just phreatic, could be catastrophic with that many people living there. And we know in 1538, a phreatic eruption happened and then a bigger magmatic eruption followed. So this forming fault can change how stress is released, of course, where stronger quakes might happen next, and where fluids or even magma could find way easier paths upwards towards the surface. So we will also explain why the uplift pattern that was once a perfect bell, this is how this looked, how the land was rising, is starting to warp in one sector. So what did the researchers actually do? Let's quickly have a look at that before I tell you more of these very concerning results. So they took the official INGV earthquake catalog and looked at earthquakes from 2019 to 2024 at every earthquake with a magnitude greater than 0.5 to keep the locations reliable. And then they sliced the central caldera of Campi Flegrei into many tall cylinders, or like a hexagon grid, each 1 kilometer wide. That allows them to check local patterns instead of smearing everything together. And then for each cylinder that they had and for each year, they asked, do the quake points lie roughly on a plane? If yes, what's that plane's angle and direction? So instead of classic least squares, which can be fooled by outliers, they used a least root square approach, plus how it's called a Monte Carlo convergent search. That means, I translate this into normal language, a robust, unsupervised way to downweight outliers and find planes even in messy clouds of points. And they then merged these neighboring cylinders that showed similar planes to see if a bigger coherent structure pops out. And it does, guys. It does. Here's what they found. From 2019 to 2022, quakes increase, but the planes point in random directions. That means diffuse, micro-cracking, no clear fault yet. 2023 till 2024, that's when the magnitudes start to increase. We see the first magnitude 4. Boom! Many more quakes, and in the central area underneath Pozzuoli and the Solfatara, they line up on one consistent plane. And the plane's dip is 53 degrees, dipping towards the north-northwest. So this one plane that they discovered collects the largest share of the seismic energy and many of the bigger events And in early 2025, where the crisis really began escalating with 2 magnitudes 4.6 and more force that follows, they keep reinforcing that exact same plane. And also, that plane, it's no surprise. Where does it sit? It sits at the point where we have the maximum land rise, the maximum uplift, the maximum stress on the crust. Basically, they're both crossing each other in the doomed area. What does that mean for the volcanic hazard? Earthquake hazards, but I want to look at the volcanic hazard because this is a volcanic crisis. So we have a forming extensional fault. They're called PIF, potential incipient fault. That is suggesting that the rocks are at or near critical failure in that zone. We're talking about a supervolcano, and then if I say the word critical failure, guys, it brings shiver down my spine. I don't know about you. Let me know in the comments. And by the way, don't forget to give this video a like and a hype before we continue. That helps my channel. Thank you so much for that. So, critical failure, guys. Maximum likely earthquake on that system is estimated, they say, around magnitude 4.4. And we know a magnitude 5 would bring many buildings to collapse. Many people lost. These are old, unenforced masonry buildings. So anything is possible, even bigger magnitudes. It's not catastrophic for modern buildings, but for these old buildings, it's frightening the residents, and damage to weaker structures can be fatal. So another thing that makes this new fault line so dangerous, a fault line can act as a pipe, as a channel for fluids. What kind of fluids am I talking about? Magma, but also as a channel for a phreatic eruption. It could increase in the first place the gas release or change where the ground actually deforms. And again, in extreme cases, organized fractures can become pathways for magma. It's of course not a prediction for an eruption, but a factor that may raise, how we call it, the efficiency of upward magma movement significantly if other conditions are met. And we're meeting these other conditions. So what's the bottom line, guys? We've moved from scattered creaking to organized cracking. That's a meaningful step in an unrest evolution of a supervolcano, and that deserves a very close look and a high alert from our side. Let's look at figure 1. It's a map of the Campi Flegrei area. You also see Vesuvius and Ischia nearby, and you see the dense population there, and you see the seismic stations that are on land and are offshore. And it also outlines the red zone, the evacuation zone that nobody is evacuating. So this area is crowded, but it's well instrumented. The network should be dense enough to pinpoint even tiny earthquakes. And that's why we do have this kind of detailed spatial analysis. And the risk is so high because you see it. So many people live right above where the action is. And then what we see here in figure 2, it's a year-by-year scatter plots of earthquake epicenters between 2019 and 2024 with cross sections. So at first, the quakes are more scattered, and over time, the number of earthquakes jumps. And by 2023 to 2024, you notice patterns, especially underneath Pozzuoli and spreading offshore. And this sets the stage for asking, are these quakes now lining up on a plane? That's why the scientists looked closer into this. And figure 3 shows you that grid of cylinders that they laid over the central caldera. Some neighboring cylinders are highlighted and then they are merged. So the authors didn't just fit one big plane to everything. They tested for planes locally inside each cylinder and then merged adjacent cylinders that shared similar plane angles. And that's basically avoids one noisy patch ruining the whole picture, and it helps reveal a real structure instead of like a math artifact. Let's talk about this PIF, this potential incipient fault, why that matters so much. Incipient means it's in the process of forming. It's not a big through-going fault yet. It's microfractures lining up. And as those links grow, stress concentrates at the tips, which can then lengthen the fault and organize future earthquakes alongside of it. And the study classifies it as a kinematic fault of the resurgence that's created by the uplift process inside of the caldera and not by far field tectonic forces. So they definitely connected to the volcanic crisis. It's not tectonic. So that implies the size may not explode all over 7, but its slip could increase, which helps unload the dome and modify the uplift patterns. And this fits in with other recent work. Multiple studies show the uplift is accelerating, earthquakes counts and energy are super exponential, and the fracturing volume grew roughly 3 to 3 kilometers depth, very shallow since 2023. The seismic and resistivity hints suggest pressurized fluid and possibly magma involvement at a depth between 4 and 8 kilometers. That pressurizes the shallow hydrothermal system that is maximum depth 4 kilometers and then up to the surface. So this paper basically adds a missing spatial piece, not only more quakes, but quakes lining up on a specific plane, signalizing the localization of failure. So what's the plane persistent? Does the same strike dip keep showing up month after month? So far, yes. If we look at the data from 2013 to 2025, we need to look at what will the events do in the future? How will they migrate? Will clusters move outwards to the dips? Because that's an indication that it's growing. What about the magnitude distribution of these earthquakes? Any step up in the largest events, still expected to be modest, but important for impact. We had 4.6. Again, I said they're considered modest in other areas, but here a magnitude 5 could be catastrophic. Fluid signals. If the gas flux changes, the vent temperature, the fumarole chemistry, faults can be like new pipes, and that is changing currently, right? Continued departure in the uplift from that perfect bell can cause other fault slip episodes. So this study, overall, my takeaway is it doesn't say eruption now, but it does say the crust under the most uplifted part of Campi Flegrei has crossed a threshold. From diffuse cracking to organized fault plane, that's a step change of the unrest, a step closer. Faults can both relieve some stress by slipping and focus pathways for fluids or for magma. So that was my summary of that study. If you find it equally as concerning, let me know in the comments, guys. But also check out this video here, because scientists were completely wrong with how they estimated the data and with what they thought was the history and the danger of the volcano. It's worse They got their carbon data completely wrong, their carbon testing. The volcano has fooled them. If you want to support the channel, buy me a coffee. Link is in the description, buymeacoffee.com. Subscribe and like and click the next one because I see you there. Guys, trust me. Stay safe.